Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, Niger's junta says that it is open to a negotiated resolution to a regional crisis sparked by its takeover last month. West African chiefs, meanwhile, are also due to discuss a possible military response, even though some enthusiasm for the option wanes. Also, around 30 people are reportedly killed in an airstrike in the Ethiopian region of Amhara. Civilians have been caught amidst a rebellion by fighters known as the Fanu and the army. And the UN's warned that the war in Sudan's just getting worse. The violent conflict between soldiers and the RSF paramilitary is costing lives and livelihoods now and in the future. The country's education system has been gutted with far-reaching effects. But first, the Prime Minister, named by the coup leaders in Niger, visited Chad on Tuesday, where he met with President Idriss Deby. Ali Mahaman Lamine Zain was appointed by the army after the ousting in late July of Niger's democratically elected head of state, Mohamed Bazoum. Zain's unannounced visit came just hours after military leaders from regional bloc Ecowas announced another meeting for Thursday and Friday this week about the possibility of military intervention in Niger. Now, despite the tough talk, the bloc and Washington would prefer a diplomatic way forward. The use of force would also have complex repercussions for Niger's neighbours, particularly those who'd have to divert troops to the border. Now, in Nigeria, which chairs ECOWAS, dozens of troops were killed in an ambush this week, and they're concerned that the focus on Niger could create a costly regional security vacuum. Samuel Okoye tells us more about this attack.
There are reports, including from military sources, who chose to remain anonymous, that the Air Force helicopter was shot down by one of the many armed groups known in local parlance as bandits. Several soldiers were said to have been killed while fighting the bandits. Some wounded soldiers were said to have died while the helicopter was airlifting them for medical treatment. The exploit of the bandits show the political situation in neighbouring Niger could have security implications. The bandits and jihadist groups like Boko Haram, who are a threat to Nigeria's sovereignty, have some of their strongholds at the porous border between Nigeria and Niger Republic. Both countries have a military cooperation to jointly combat these armed groups, especially the jihadists. But the relationship between both countries has become strained following Nigeria's opposition to the coup that brought the military government to power in Niger. Observers fear the deteriorating relationship between both countries will create the right atmosphere for armed groups like bandits and jihadists to grow stronger and threaten both countries and others in the West African sub-region. The relationship between both countries can only get worse to the delight of armed groups, with prospect of Nigeria leading an ECOWAS standby force to restore democracy in Niger.
Samuel Okoye there for us in Lagos. Now, in Ethiopia, civilians continue to be caught up in clashes in Amhara. The region is home to the country's second largest ethnic group and is subject to a state of emergency as militia battle soldiers there. Dozens of people were killed this week, including children, in a bombing of a town held by the militia known as the Fanu. Clotilde Azar brings us more from Addis Ababa.
What is suspected to have been a drone targeted the town on Sunday morning. Local medics put the death toll at least 30 deaths, but some Ethiopian media have estimated it to be as high as 70, with dozens of fatalities not reported to hospitals. People are also reportedly dying from a lack of oxygen, which is in short supply because of the blockade of the road of the region by local militia. The clashes began in April capital over Amaran rejection of a federal decision to dismantle regional special forces. Some critics say the move will weaken the region. The National Defense Forces have taken back control of several cities in Amara, but overall the conflict is still marked. There's still not been any official deaths told, but many civilians have been killed. The Ethiopian Human Rights Commission has called on the government to stop the arrest and persecution of ethnic Amarans in the capital, Addis Ababa. It's also called on both sides to stop the fighting in the region itself.
Clotilde Azar there for us in the Ethiopian capital. Now, the UN's warned that Sudan's war risks spiralling out of control. More than 1 million people have fled the country to neighbouring states since the conflict began in mid-April. Around 3.5 million are thought to be displaced within Sudan itself. The devastating fighting between the army and the RSF paramilitaries also cost lives and futures. The education system has been pushed to the point of collapse. Laurent Berstecker tells us more.
Growing up in Sudan, Arafa Ibrahim always wanted to become a doctor. But as the conflict rages on in her homeland, the young woman has begun to lose hope of ever realizing her lifelong dream.
I started university in 2017 and I didn't graduate because of the conflict. Now they've destroyed the university and they've destroyed me as well. I don't have a future anymore. I'm back to where I started.
Like Arafa, millions of young Sudanese have been forced to halt or abandon their studies due to conflict. Ongoing fighting between the army and RSF rebels has seen thousands of schools across the country close, be converted into shelters, or simply destroyed. And with Sudan's education minister recently cancelling end-of-the-year exams in conflict areas, a return to normal seems unlikely to happen anytime soon.
We have problems with seating. Some students have to bring their own chairs to class. We're also running out of textbooks. And we have no idea when the new academic year will start.
NGOs now warn that many young Sudanese, unable to complete their education, have become increasingly vulnerable to abuse.
There have been reports of children being recruited by different armed actors. And we have also have had reports of sexual abuse on a fairly wide scale.
Since the fighting started in April, the number of out-of-school children in Sudan rose from 7 to 9 million. And with the warring factions seemingly locked in a stalemate, NGOs say the situation is likely to deteriorate further.
Since the start of the summer, Senegalese households have been grappling with rising electricity costs. Hotter than average seasonal temperatures have increased energy consumption, and the national electricity company, Senelec, is accused of unfairly squeezing more profit from customers. Our team reports from Dakar.
Pap Hassan keeps a watchful eye on his prepaid meter. His electricity could run out at any moment. Every day he pays between €1.50 to €2.30 to power his four-bedroom home.
Last night at 11 p.m. we paid for 10 kilowatts. Today there are just 5 kilowatts left.
He says that the cost of electricity provided by the national electricity company, Senelec, is in constant flux.
Before, €1.50 would get you 10 kilowatts. But sometimes you only get 5 or 6 kilowatts. They provide no explanation for this.
Senelec says its tariffs vary according to nationwide demand for and consumption of electricity. The higher the demand, the greater the price. We spoke with a real estate investor who preferred to remain anonymous.
I've got pay for electricity on a dozen or so meters because of my line of work.
He says that volatility in the price of electricity is eating into his profits.
We lose about 20% of our income because of the impact this has on our negotiations with tenants. It is all because of the high electricity costs.
Customers have grown increasingly frustrated in recent weeks. A new consumer rights group is calling for greater transparency from Senelec, particularly when it comes to the tariffs.
We just want to get a fair return for the amount we pay. They are the providers, we are the consumers. The overall cost should also be reduced. That would mean that they need to reduce the rates.
Despite multiple invitations to do so, Senelec declined to meet with us for an interview.
Mozambique's colonial past is being examined through the lens of a prize-winning photographer. Yasmin Forte documents stories, both her own and her country's, with works that juxtapose images of the past with contemporary ones. Take a look.
Camera in hand, Yasmin Forte scours the streets of Maputo in search of memories. Through her lens, she captures the alleyways and buildings of her childhood, a way for the photographer, born to a Portuguese father and a Mozambican mother, to explore her own fragmented identity.
This is where my father grew up and did his military training. They used to hold parades on this square. Everyone was singing.
Forte's father came to Mozambique as a child and enrolled in the army at a young age. During his years in the military, he met her mother in the city of Quelimane, and when the Portuguese were asked to leave the country in 1975, he decided to stay behind and start a family. An almost ordinary story, but one which touches upon the very identity of post-colonial Africa.
I'm trying to tie these narratives, to join them together. Through my pictures and collages, I want to tell a story that combines the past and the present.
Yasmin Forte's art recently earned her a prize in the African Contemporary Photography Competition, a sign of recognition which the artist hopes can help draw attention to her work as she continues to explore themes of colonialism, migration, and identity in Africa.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks for joining us. Do so again if you can. Till then, take care. Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith.
All the latest in politics, economics and the arts in Africa on France 24. Our journalists are in every region, every country, to report on the emergence of a continent of unparalleled riches. Bringing you Africa's stories on France 24.
Good, thanks for joining us. Do so again. Take care.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.